How's it going, everyone? It's Josh here. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about bow drills and why you might not be getting one successfully. Alright, so I'm going to split this video up into 5 parts. The bow, hearth board, bearing block, tinder, and spindle. First thing I want to touch on is bows. This is most likely going to be the easiest part of making a bow drill fire. It's basically just a stick with a string on it. But it's a lot more complicated than that, actually. You want to get a bow that has a good length to it. This one is a little bit too short. They say you want one that goes from your fingers all the way into your armpit. That way you get the full movement of your arm when you're doing the bow drill. This one right here, which we find to work good for us, is a little bit longer than that, but honestly I think I prefer it a little bit longer. That way you have a little bit of room on the edges here where it gets close to the actual bow itself. When the string gets close there, you don't have to worry about your spindle bumping up against there. You have a little bit of extra room, especially if you're doing the bow drill with someone else, which I would recommend in the beginning, having someone else help you out with the bow drill once it starts getting tiring, because you will get tired doing bow drills unless you're used to it. It's basically just like sawing through a big piece of wood. It's a lot of pressure, a lot of movement, especially when you're pushing down in the bearing block. But a longer bow like this, I'd say, is probably a good length. A little bit longer than fingers to the armpit. Maybe fingers to like the center of your chest would be good. So that's basically bows. Also, the string that you want to use for your bow, you don't want a big rope. You want something that's going to want to bite into the wood a little bit more. This is just 550 paracord. This is what works good for us. It will stretch out a little bit, which will make it lose some of its grip. But you can take some beeswax like we have in the past. Just get a chunk of beeswax from the hardware store or a beeswax candle and actually rub it on the inside of the string like that until it gets nice and warm, and then that'll actually give some more grip because that's nice and sticky. It'll add more friction. And also, if you're in the middle of doing a bow drill, your string loosens up, you can grab the string like this, pull it tight, and that'll tighten up the string and give you a little bit better grip. So we recommend either 550 paracord or a bank line can work too, which is a little bit more difficult to work with. Next thing I want to touch on is spindles. We have a few spindles here that we've used over the past couple weeks. This is one we made recently. This was a little bit damp, and that's a big thing that you want to look out for when you're trying to find a good spindle, is something that's a dry wood and a soft wood. Some of the easiest soft woods to identify that work well with our experience is willow. Willow is a really easy wood to identify. It has big stringy leaves that just kind of droop down in all directions. That's really easy to identify, and that's a pretty soft wood. It works good for us. It's actually what we got our first bow drill fire with, was with a piece of willow. Another wood I like to recommend is aspen. Aspen is a soft wood. You can also do cottonwood, or eastern red cedar is a decent wood. It's just a little bit harder than the rest of these. So I recommend willow, aspen, cottonwood, something like that. But when it comes to shaping out your spindle, you're going to want something either as thick or thicker than your thumb. This one's a bit thicker. This one is about as thick, just a little bit thicker. I'd say about this size is good. At the top, you're going to want to make it pointy, because that will actually, that's another big thing that people mess up on, is not making the top of your spindle pointy enough. You don't want to make it have as little surface area as possible. I'll give you an example here. Just something like this. And one thing when you're getting a spindle is get a long one, at least the length between your thumb and your pinky finger, because you're going to be carving this down a lot, because it's going to burn down the spindle, because the spindle is what helps create the dust. It's not just the hearth board burning, but the spindle itself is burning a little bit too, and you're going to constantly be recarving it. But this is probably good, so you can see if this fits into bearing block like this. This one, this bearing block's burnt in quite a bit, but it still has little enough friction in there. It doesn't want it to shoulder out. So getting a pointy top on there is important. And on the bottom, you're going to want to flatten it off. Make sure it's flat. But at the same time, you want to have the edges slightly tapered in. That way it smoothly burns into the wood and will eventually turn into a smooth, just rounded base like this one is. So that'll burn its way down. And that's basically it for spindles. You want the right thickness, the right length, and you want it to be a dry, soft wood. And next thing we want to touch on is hearth boards, because generally you're going to want to make your hearth board out of the same material as your spindle. They just work well together. They're the same hardness, so one won't burn more than the other. We have a couple of hearth boards here. This one is a fresh one, haven't used it really yet. So these two are good hearth boards. One of these is aspen, I believe this one is, and then this one is willow. Aspen's a little bit softer than willow, but you can see these have each had a good amount of use. This one has 4 pretty much full burn throughs, and then this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So out of a small chunk of wood like this, you can get a good amount of fires. In one of these holes, I believe we probably got at least 3 bow drill fires out of each one of these divots. So if you have a nice quality dry wood, you know, a thing like this will last you quite a long time. But when it comes to getting dimensions and stuff for a hearth board, biggest thing is finding a softwood. You're going to want to try to avoid putting your holes in the actual heartwood of the tree, because that'll be a little bit harder. But biggest thing is making sure it's flat. So I'd say no less than 1/2 inch thickness at the very least. That's even cutting it close. We like to go 3/4 inch to 1 inch on thickness. But if it's not flat, when you put it on your foot to try to brace it down to do a bow drill on it, it's going to want to move back and forth, and that will kick out any ember and any dust that you're building up and just pretty much ruin your day. So make sure it's flat, make sure that you cut the notch in correctly. A big thing is cutting out the bottoms here, because that'll give more airflow. If you have your notch cut, just taper the edges like that, and that'll give you a little bit more airflow, just like that. That way the ember isn't just sitting in a spot that isn't getting any airflow. This will draw air in and move it around the ember, and will help that ember build up faster. So that's an important one. But that's basically it for hearth boards. Besides not putting your notch when you're doing the hearth board too close to the edge, that's basically it. Like this one right here, you can see it's a little bit too close to the edge, especially if we're using a spindle this size. It will overhang, and that's not good. So get a good notch in there. But I guess next thing is bearing blocks. Bearing blocks are the simplest things to make, but they're also the most complex. And when I say that, I mean you want to get a hard wood, because even walnut, this is a chunk of walnut right here, and even walnut can be too soft. As you can see, this burnt in quite a bit, which depending on how your spindle is shaped, that's going to want to shoulder out. You don't want to make a small notch. That way, when you put your spindle up against it, only the tip of the spindle is actually touching your bearing block. If it goes in this deep, it'll still work, but you'll be working against yourself pretty hard. So if you end up making a hole this deep, just start a new one and work in with that. But a hardwood is definitely a must. A live wood is better because it'll be harder to burn through. It won't want to burn as much because it's wet. So it won't want to actually create dust and blacken like that, which will allow you to have a little bit less friction in there and not actually be burning in and shouldering out. And this is a big reason that people don't get bow drill fires. They end up getting exhausted because they just work so hard, because their spindle ends up shouldering out, which means basically the edges of your spindle here end up touching your hearth board on the edges and not just the tip, and that adds a lot more friction. And especially if you're trying to push down hard on this to get a nice ember going, it's gonna really tire you out. And that's why also having a second person with you when you're practicing is really nice. But if you don't, you can always get one of these. And this is something that I also recommend to beginners. If I can find it here, it's in my hand. Is a wheel that has a bearing in it. And this bearing spins freely. There's little to no friction in this. So basically you put the top of your spindle in there. You don't have to worry about it shouldering out, because it's not actually creating any friction. It's just spinning with the bearing. And if you push this down onto a hearth board like this, you can put pressure on there without having any friction up above, and it'll really make your bow drill practice a lot easier. We do that a lot when we're just trying to experiment with different woods. We don't really bring this out into the woods with us too much, but if we're at home just experimenting with different woods, we like to use that. That way we don't exhaust ourselves. But last thing I wanted to touch on is tinder. Now, tinder can be tricky. It's always tricky depending on what area that you live in. You know, you can't really go wrong with tulip poplar, eastern red cedar if it's dry. If the eastern red cedar is wet, it just kind of sucks. But One thing that we like to do is get a big bundle of grass like this. We live in Illinois. It's a prairie state. This stuff is everywhere. You can't really go into a wilderness area and not find grass like this. As you can look around, it's all behind me here. But I like to make sort of a bird's nest shape with this, then just wrap it up. Then I use this to hold my tinder. If I have wood shavings or something like that, say all these wood shavings here, I can put these in here. And if they're thin enough, these ones aren't really, these are more thick shavings from carving the spindles. But if you use a spine of your knife to scrape a dry wood, even the wood that you used for your spindle and your hearth board, if you have any left over, that should be a nice dry soft wood. Scrape it with the spine of your knife, fill up the inside of the tinder bundle, make a little hole, and then put your ember in there once you get it going. You don't need to find a tinder that's necessarily perfect, like bark. A nice dry bark is definitely one of the best tinders you can find. But even a dry grass, if this stuff was all dried out, you wouldn't need anything else. It won't want to burn for a long time, so you're going to want to have more to throw on afterwards, or very small kindling. Alright, so yeah, if the grass is dry, pretty much don't have to worry about anything else. You can blow it into flame, and if you have small stuff, that'll light up pretty easy. But that's basically all I wanted to cover. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. Thank you guys for watching. My name is Josh, and I'll see you in the next video.